Good afternoon, everyone. What does it mean to be on the front lines of defending media freedom, and what lessons can we learn from those who have done journalism at great risk? My name is Scott Griffen. I'm the Executive Director of the International Press Institute. IPI is a global network of editors, journalists, and publishers dedicated to defending media freedom. And this year, IPI is celebrating our 75th anniversary. And it's been a really powerful experience, I would say, to go through the archives, the historical archives of IPI, dating back to 1950, and see and reflect on the global fight for press freedom and for independent journalism since the end of the Second World War over the past 7.5 decades. And there are a lot of observations and lessons that can be drawn from that. But I think two really stand out to me. One is that it is a continuous fight for press freedom. Press freedom is something that we can never take for granted. There will always be actors who want to silence the news, who want to silence journalists. The other observation that I've seen is that there's a recurring resilience, both of individual journalists and of journalism itself, to respond to challenges, risks, and changes. And that, I think, is something that we'll also talk about today, but it's something that can also give us some hope. And I'm really honored this afternoon to be joined by 3 journalists working in some of the world's most difficult environments for the press. Lydia from Mexico, Olga from Ukraine, and Kadri from Turkey, and I'll introduce them in just a moment in turn. But what we want to do today is hear from our speakers about what they understand, what resilience has meant to them, the lessons that they have drawn from their own experiences in journalism and defending the public's right to know, and how they see the future of press freedom and journalism. So thanks very much for joining us this afternoon. And I'd like to start with you, Lydia. Lydia Cacho, she's a Mexican journalist, more than 30 years of experience covering very difficult topics in one of the world's most dangerous countries for the press, covering organized crime, human trafficking, drug trafficking, gender violence, organized crime. You're the author of, if I have the number right, 21 books. You're an IPI World Press Freedom Hero as well. And one of your books was The Demons of Eden, and which exposed a child abuse ring implicating politicians and businessmen in Mexico. And after that publication, you were charged with defamation, kidnapped, detained, and tortured, and today you're living in exile. So, Lydia, I want to start with you and ask you a question about resilience. And in your personal experience, what does resilience mean for you, and how did you experience that in these difficult situations you went through in your career?
Thank you so much. Well, I guess that the word resilience has been overused, as we talked the other day. But for me, I discovered the first time someone put a gun on my head 34 years ago, outside the office of the magazine I was directing, because I wrote an article on domestic violence, and the aggressor was a very famous and powerful lawyer in Cancun, Mexico. So he just came to the magazine door, and in front of everyone, he put a gun on my head, and he said, "You cannot mess with me and my personal life." Because like many people back then and now, think that domestic and gender violence, it's a personal issue and not a judicial issue. And then, like a few days after, I thought about resilience. I think it's just the psychological ability to confront reality and fear, and the way you manage to use your intelligence and your emotional intelligence, and you develop tools in order to keep on going, because what you do matters not only to you, but it matters to other people. So I guess it's not a very professional description, but for me it still is. After 35 years of being an investigative journalist, after torture, after everything, I think it's that. It's also a fight for life. I am resilient because I am a journalist, and I think that we do this thing that is, we are facing the powers that be, and we know what we're doing, right? We're just messing with the dragon. So resilience is nothing else but being ready to mess with the dragon.
Thank you, Lydia. Was there ever a moment in your career where you thought, this is too much, and I need to step back, and what sort of got you through in that moment?
Oh, many, many times. Sometimes, well, I've been in therapy forever, obviously, because mental health is so important for war reporters or experts on this kind of journalism. But what got me through is just to understand and see that the work we do matters to a lot of people, that journalism is always important. It's not that we are important, it's what we do is important to other people. And I guess a little dancing, a lot of loving, and some tequila sometimes really get you through that. So yes, it's a combination of just enjoying life, because I learned that my torturers and the governors and everyone that has been trying to kill me for 20 years, what they wanted me to sink in fear, right? So every time I go like, oh my God, this is it, I'm gonna quit and do something, I don't know, just teach journalism. And then something happens, I cover the news, I meet amazing people, and it works and it's useful, and I go like, no, I'm never gonna quit. So that's it.
Thanks, Lydia. I want to turn now to Kadri Gürsel, a senior Turkish journalist who has spent his career working for some of Turkey's most important independent media, and you're someone who has also faced throughout your career different forms of attacks and retaliation for your work. Beginning in the 90s, you were kidnapped by the PKK and held for 26 days, I believe. Later wrote a book about that experience. Later, the beginning of the repression against journalism in the Erdogan era, you were fired from the newspaper Milliyet over a tweet, I believe, that was critical. That was at the beginning of this new attacks on journalism in Turkey. And in 2016, you were arrested and jailed for 11 months as part of the crackdown on the media following the coup attempt when you were working with the newspaper Cumhuriyet. And at this moment, there's another crackdown on journalism taking place in Turkey, and I want to talk about that as well. But first, I want to ask you a similar question. What has resilience meant to you over these decades where you've been working in journalism, telling important stories, and facing retaliation for that?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I was thinking that I must have some credentials to talk about journalistic resilience, but you made a good resume, so I don't want to repeat it. But one thing, to give an example of my early days, some 30 years ago, I was kidnapped by the PKK, and when they released me, I wrote a book, and my point of view about the PKK was not changed at all. So I kept my view, and I was never surprised on the mountains when I survived helicopter gunship attacks, mortar attacks, or I saved my life in the middle of armored clashes, etc., because it was a real lifetime adventure. But for this, I didn't have a different idea, different opinions about the PKK afterwards, because I was resilient. I don't show humility about it, because I had a certain worldview. I had contextualized PKK long before what happened to me, so it was easy to face the challenges. So to be resilient, I think, for a journalist, first, the prerequisite is that you need to be a homo journalisticus. To be a homo journalisticus means that, you can find the definition everywhere, but you need to You know, you need to have a strong belief in objectivity. You need to have a tendency of skepticism or questioning the authority, etc., etc. But it's not enough. It's not enough. Because why it's not enough? Because to be a journalist, truly and utterly a journalist, you also need to have a, excuse me to say that, but a strong character. Without a strong character, you can't be a, journalist comme il faut, okay? Because to be a journalist and to practice your profession accordingly, one has to be indifferent to the materializations with an S of risks in the country you are practicing your profession, and you need to be indifferent to rewards or attempt to corrupt the journalist. So you need to be incorruptible. And more or less, in my own capacity, I theorized the resilience of journalism, of a journalist. The first question I asked myself was, is it worthy to be killed, to be shot, to be jailed, to be tortured, to be kidnapped, to be beaten, to be attacked days, weeks, and years, along the days, years, and you name it, by government trolls, to be threatened, etc., just for the maximum point of people's interest in knowing the truth, in being informed, so they can make their mind to produce, to change their political intentions, political choices, in order to bring change through the ballot box, so to run the fundamental virtue of democracy, which is bringing change through the electoral way. What would be the answer of the audience? I don't know, but my answer was no. No, simply no, because journalism is a profession that we can practice only in democracies. Look, for example, how many journalists are in jail in North Korea? None, zero. How many journalists are in jail in Belarus? I don't think that there are journalists in North Korea or Belarus, because there is no journalists left in there. In some countries, which are, in sort of a twilight zone, meaning it means that there is for example, take for example my country, or let's take countries where the far-right populists or extreme rights, or with having totalitarian tendencies, have come to power. It's a twilight zone. These are twilight zone countries. There journalism can be practiced, and well, the sole quality that can make you resilient is your character, your dignity, your self-esteem, and I think that's as long as you remain as a person that having internalized journalism, you can have the force, you can have the strength to resist against all sorts of repression, pressure, and one more thing before concluding. Before the court in infamous Silivri prison complex, before they were, declaring the sentence, I said to the court, whatsoever be your sentence, you acquit me or you sentence me in jail term, etc., I will continue to practice my profession. That's it. So I did so. It is now 8 years ago. It was 8 years ago. I continue as long as I can in my capacity to be a journalist without changing my line. And journalism and democracy are two things that go on par with each other. Without journalism, there is no democracy. Without democracy, there is no journalism. So this precious thing has. We need to theorize the value of personality and journalism in advance, and you need to. I mean, you, the audience, need to learn from Turkish experience a lot, because it took 10 years for them to finish off with the mainstream media. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kadri, for all of that. And I feel I should say for the record that we do have some journalists jailed in Belarus, unfortunately. North
42.
Korea, I believe. Yes.
42 journalists currently in jail in Belarus.
How many?
42.
Oh.
So,
Very, very, very high number.
Point well taken, but
excuse me for my ignorance.
No worries. Thank you, Kadri. And finally, I'd like to turn to Olga Rudenko, the editor-in-chief of the Kiev Independent. Olga, I think many of us are familiar with the story of what happened to the media in Ukraine around the full-scale invasion of Russia. Had a huge, devastating impact on the media, and yet there was also this story of this buzzword that we discussed, resilience. Ukrainian media rose to the occasion to tell the story, the truth of the war, to their own communities, to the world. Now, 2025, we're looking at another situation. We have a completely, in many ways, changed geopolitical reality with another impact on media in Ukraine, coupled with a funding crisis. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about this new situation, how it compares to what you experienced at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, and whether it's a new situation and whether you draw on the experience of the previous crisis.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Thank you for having me here. We indeed discussed 2 days ago when we met to discuss the panel. I said there is no way I'm going to answer the question without addressing the fact that resilience has become such a buzzword in Ukraine that we almost shy away from it because it's become part of the Ukrainian brand internationally, I guess, since 2022 because of the enormous resilience demonstrated by Ukrainians in response to the Russian aggression. And I did say that I was going to address how it's almost losing meaning to us. But just today, just before this, I had an experience that changed my mind a little bit about the word resilience. I went to a panel held by Russian journalists about the 10-year anniversary of the media outlet, and I saw them using the word resilience, describing their work. There was a slide saying 10 years of resilience by Russian journalists, and I saw that and I thought, I don't know, I'm jealous about Russians using the word resilience in that context. No, I want resilience for Ukraine. So I'm no longer denying it. I'm embracing the word resilience now. But I was thinking, as the previous panelists were talking about what it means, how I would define it if I had to write a dictionary entry for myself now with that word. And I think that for me it would be to be able to continue doing what you believe in, doing what's true to you, while all the external factors are not really beneficial to that, not are hostile to that. Being able to distinguish what is the external noise and to distinguish the things that are kind of like false I don't know how to best phrase it. I obviously didn't think about it long enough. But what are the kind of like the false leads? What are the things that there may be pressure by society or by this current situation on you to think or believe something or to act in a certain way, and to be able to say no, this is actually not what I want to do, not what I believe in, and to be able to continue doing what is true to you. Like, for example, when, the resilience that Ukrainians demonstrated 3 years ago is standing up for our country, as a significant part of the world thought that Ukraine was going to fall. And the resilience Ukrainians are demonstrating today, including Ukrainian journalists and anybody in Ukraine, is just still, despite the odds, believing that there's going to be a Ukrainian victory. And it's extremely difficult to continue believing in that now. It is more difficult than it was 3 years ago, and it's more difficult than it was 2 years ago. 3 years ago, we had this, after the start of the invasion, enormous support of the international community. But that has, well, I can't say that it has faded away completely, but it changed a lot, especially with the latest events in the United States and with the new administration. It is now not a marginal view to say that Ukraine needs to give territories to Russia, for example. If something that used to be Russian propaganda was really an insane thing to say in a civilized society, now that's something that the top officials in America say that, the Russian-speaking regions in Ukraine, and Ukraine can just give away lands and so on and so on. And to be at the epicenter of that, to have to follow that in the news, to have to live through that, and to still in your mind and heart know that that's not right. Even as everybody maybe the way I'm thinking about it, we're continuing our work while the global applause that we had at some point in 2022 has faded down. So to me, resilience is being able to continue that. And I was also, another thing I was thinking about is what's the source of that? And to me personally, I think I have two sources of resilience. One is the people who I work with. It's at the Kyiv Independent, we have a very young team. It's a mixed team of Ukrainians and foreigners who live in Ukraine, who love Ukraine, and just seeing the enormous dedication that they have, seeing the level of ambition that they have, seeing we can't get away from this word resilience, is very, very inspiring. And by the way, several of them are in the room, so thank you guys for being the source of inspiration. And the second source is people who I don't know personally, I don't see, but the Ukrainian defenders, Ukrainian soldiers who are fighting every day and doing it in very difficult conditions, under enormous pressure, often with lack of supplies and in extreme conditions, really. And the thing I'm saying to myself is, if they keep standing their ground, then how can I not?
Thank you, Olga. I think that was really powerful to hear. We've spoken a bit here now about your sort of personal reflections on resilience. And I was mentioning at the beginning that one of the observations that I've seen, looking through IPI's historical archives going back 75 years is this sort of, these recurring crises in journalism, this idea that journalism and journalists are facing an existential threat from different factors. the journalism is dying. And at the same time, you see these stories of resilience, as I was saying, and almost as if it's inherent to journalism, or there's something about journalism that survives or that has to survive. And I wanted to ask you how you see this. I mean, we're in a moment where there are growing attacks on journalism around the world. We know that. It's a very, very difficult moment. But how do you perceive this in the sense of, you know, saying, okay, journalism is at the risk of dying? Lydia, we talked about this 2 days ago. You had quite a strong response to this, and I'm curious if you can share that, sort of based on your experience about what journalism is and why it matters.
Yes, well, the previous panel, the people who stay for the previous panel will see with this magnificent 4 women with Maria Ressa, made it very clear that we're facing a new crisis, not only in journalism, but in truth-telling everywhere around the world, with tech taking over the connection, the human connections, and all our information. So I'm not going to go back to that. Please watch that online because it's so amazing. Everything that they said was amazing. But I don't know, I was listening to my colleagues and I was thinking, it's so different to be a war reporter that lives in Madrid and all of a sudden goes to Syria or to Palestine or to Ukraine and then goes back home and it's just, you know, nice house and everything is safe, than to be a journalist like the 3 of us that have been covering their own country within their own internal wars, different internal wars. And that makes a very different view of your profession, the way you see things, because you also feel them, as we just saw with Olga. It's like there's a continuous internal turmoil in which you know that you have your principles, you have to be kind of objective, even though we could discuss that, but we won't have time. But you have to be ethical and you have to tell the truth and you have to contrast everything you say. And you said the other day that a long time ago when television came, people thought journalism was going to disappear because the radio was real journalism, right? So right now we're discussing that all over again. I don't think journalism will disappear. What will disappear is the way we used to think was the right way. We have to create new ways that the previous panel just explained it very well. It's just keep fighting. We're counterpowers. I mean, for me, journalism is the counterpower. If you believe it is counterpower, then you will keep going. If you don't, you will stop eventually because you will find it boring. And we have been discussing this among the panels this weekend, which I find really important and interesting. It's an ethical question, a debate, which is if we are questioning as famous reporters, if we are asking if we are relevant, if I say, oh, is Lydia Cacho relevant still? That's a stupid question. That needs no answer. It doesn't matter if I am, as a reporter, relevant. What is important is if the work I do is relevant for the stories of the people that are telling me their life, their suffering, their pains. So sometimes I do want to quit, as I think we all have, eventually, for one day at least, or after suffering a lot. After torture, I really was like in bad shape and very depressed. But then I went to Congo and I interviewed all these women that are saving their country by themselves amongst all these wars and everything and the land grabbing and they invited me to dance at the end of the interviews. And I just came back to Mexico and I said, this is it. This is why I do what I'm doing. You know, because if we don't do that, they won't be heard in the rest of the world, at least in Latin America. So that's the meaning of relevance. It's the issue, it's the other people. It's always the other people who are relevant. And that's why I think journalism has to fight for its own life, because we are not needed, but the profession is needed.
Just a quick follow-up, Lydia, on Mexico in particular, which has been one of the most dangerous countries for journalists, a huge crisis of impunity. Is there anything that gives you hope or optimism about the future of journalism in Mexico in particular?
I think so. I think that journalists, young journalists and old journalists like me, are still hopeful. And that's a very meaningful word. And I think my criminologist teacher told me once that hope was not like a miraculous word that comes to you from heaven or anything like that. It's not something based on faith. Hope is the actual acknowledgement that you know that something must change and something has to change. You understand what it is, and then you ask yourself, what I'm willing to risk, what I'm willing to do, and what I'm willing to expose in order for hope to persist far away from me. And I think that's it. Mexico, it's a very hopeful country in that way. And I mean, I don't know, there's a lot of impunity in Mexico, but with me, I've been fighting this criminal cases against me for 20 years, but I also have put a lot of the mafia guys and senators and governors in jail. So it's just, you know, it's just, you understand reality. I'm a realistic person, very realistic, but I do have hope. So if you combine both of them, you keep going. And I think Mexican journalists do the same thing. We do believe our country deserves the best journalism because we are the counterpowers that are in front of the regular citizens.
Thank you, Lydia. Kadri, coming back to you, I was saying earlier, Turkey is in the midst of another crackdown of sorts on the press, covering the protests around the arrest of Istanbul Mayor İmamoğlu. And actually, IPI published 2 years ago a 100-year history of journalism in Turkey, and you see that there have been these recurring crackdowns on journalism in Turkey, but still a very strong, resilient journalism sector, not to reuse that word. But I wonder, when you see what's happening now, what goes through your mind about the survival of journalism in Turkey? Is this something bigger than the current moment?
Yeah, well, you know, it always happened this way. You know, authoritarian drive or authoritarianism or tendency toward authoritarianism whatsoever starts in between the in the relations between the political power and the media. The first, they are like the canaries in the coal mine, okay? They ring the alarm. When there is a power with bad tendencies, trying or, you know, contemplating to limit democracy, it first attacks to media. So it happened this way in my country and happened again. Because this time, this political power, which I qualify as the competitive authoritarian, a competitive authoritarian style of kind of regime, is losing its competitiveness, a false competitiveness, of course, because by every calculus, although the field is uneven, is a democracy, so-called democracy played on an uneven field, but the opposition, the team of the opposition wins. So how to stop the opposition win the next elections? They need to intervene to the combination of the team. You cannot run for, you cannot be the part of this team. So go to jail. This is the mentality, in the simplest way. So to get there, they refresh their attack, you know, against the remnants of the independent media, remnants of the opposition media. And there were, yes, of course, protests, widespread protests, because there was an, you know, it provoked an upheaval, because the patience of the, you know, opposing society, dissident society, was really fed up. with this, and then people took the streets. And then, in order to prevent the news stories about this protest to spread and to increase the effect of the protest, they again attacked the media. And because before coming to this, arrestation of Ekrem İmamoğlu, the metropolitan mayor of Istanbul, long before, 2 months before, the harassment of the media, of the opposition, of the dissident media, I have to say, was started again, but didn't work. But there is one important thing that we have to be, aware of, is that the distinction between old school journalism and political activists using in legitimate ways journalism to serve their political agenda. This has to be a demarcation line that we have to be aware of. Except this, beyond this, journalism's resilience is well and survive in Turkey. That's why people, are aware, are informed about what is going on the streets, despite the harsh repression over the independent media, I have to say.
Is there something, I'll ask a similar question to you, is there something that makes you believe or gives you some optimism that real critical independent journalism in Turkey will survive this phase? Is there something that kind of gives you a little bit of hope despite the current crackdown and the past 20 years of repression against the press?
Look, as long as this sort of kind of regimes last, the hope for the survival of the independent media diminish. It's quite natural, because the generational transition of experience and masterminds of journalism, all sort of qualities related with journalism are shut down, are cut down by the regime, and then it becomes more difficult than ever. And now there is an upcoming generation with no masters, because all masters they've got older, or they left the scene, so they are on their own mostly, and with very, very limited financial resources to survive, to practice the profession, because the government destroyed the sector. There is no sector, because the opposition media or the independent media, these are two intermingled concepts. We have what I would say opposition media / independent media isn't difficult to generate resources, enough resources to sustain, and they need funding, and they need training, and it's a difficult. We are heading towards a crossroads and a difficult turning point historically. If it continues this way, a resurrection of the independent media, when Turkey will one day pass to democracy, for example, when democracy will come in Turkey, we will have the difficulty to find, experienced, well-educated, quality journalists to lead the way.
Thanks. Kadri, Olga, coming back to you, you talked a little bit before about the fact that, this is a different situation now. It's the global applause isn't there anymore. The funding situation for media in Ukraine has changed. It's a much more difficult environment in some ways. How do you see the future of independent journalism in Ukraine? We don't have a crystal ball, but is there something that gives you, I'll ask you the question as well, is there something that gives you, optimism that media in Ukraine will survive, thrive, be able to tell the story?
Thank you. I should probably start by saying that ever since I gotten into this profession, I've been hearing that it's almost dead. Basically, when I started, I don't know, 15 or over 15 years ago, I was immediately the first ever professional conversation or conference or something, conference like that I was at. Everybody's talking about how this profession is on the verge of dying and it's going to be irrelevant in a few years. And I was like, oh my God, I'm really coming to this party very late. But here I am 15 years later at this huge event with hundreds of amazing colleagues, and evidently our work is still needed. So to my own, I don't know why, but I only have Ukrainian words in my mind now. My own kind of like counterbalance to this doomsaying about journalism is actually looking into the past. And looking at the history of Ukrainian journalism in the past couple of decades, because the trust in journalism and the strengths of journalism has fluctuated quite a bit, and there were moments when it seemed like the trust is really, really going away, and plus the new platforms are emerging, and people are, looking at, when Facebook became a thing in Ukraine, and Twitter became a thing, and people were turning to those platforms for news or to talk to, to hear from newsmakers directly and bypassing journalists. It seemed like we're on this pretty pessimistic trend. But then every time something major, some crisis happened in Ukraine, people still turn to journalists, people still turn to media. The forms of the media may have changed. Like, for example, in 2004, when we had Orange Revolution, television played a big role. And in 2013 and 14, when we had the Euromaidan Revolution, it was the internet, it was Twitter, and it was Facebook, and it was online media that were popping up, new ones back then. It was online streaming was just beginning to be a thing. And then when COVID happened, people also turned to traditional media. And then when the full-scale invasion of Russia happened, same. The importance of media, the role that they perform for Ukrainians, and in the cases like the Kyiv Independent, where we report about Ukraine for the global audience. So in crisis, people still turn to traditional media because there is still trust. But I think it's not just about trust, and this is something that is probably my source of optimism. I think it's about building a community around your media. I do think that sometimes we tend to think about the role of journalism as almost something like preaching. Like we are, we're separate from the readers, we're above them, and we're telling them the story. And I think it needs to be, and the only way that it can survive is less us telling the story to them, us dictating what the story is, and more sitting together and having a conversation. And journalists are the ones who are leading the conversation, who are maybe moderating it, who are giving the cues, but it's still a conversation. You hear back from people, and and it becomes a conversation. And that's something that I think we've been practicing pretty successfully at the Kyiv Independent. We're funded by our readers. We currently have 17,000 members who support us monthly. If you are not yet a member of the Kyiv Independent, go to our website and become one. And you'll be helping us a lot. And we hear back from them. We have different channels to talk to them. We have a Discord server. We have, we get tons of emails. We have ways to be led by them. And it's the first time in my career where I work in the media that is in such close contact with the audience. And I also see how the Kyiv Independent became for them more than a source of news, because for almost almost no people who read us need us as their essential news source, because most of them are not in Ukraine. So it's not really essential for them, for their daily decisions, to know, what is being attacked in Ukraine right now, where Russian missiles are flying or something. But they feel attached to the story of Ukraine, to the story of the Kyiv Independent. They know the brand, they know the team behind the brand. We make it very visible. And they build a connection, they build trust. And it's an example of how one team, one organization can become kind of like a gravity point, gravity center for something that builds a community. And I think this is for me the source of optimism about the future of journalism. And I think this community-based journalism is the future.
Thanks, Olga. We may have time for a couple of questions, one or two questions from the audience. Any questions, anything you would like to know from our panelists, please?
Thank you for a very inspiring panel. I'm Marzu Gebul, I'm a journalist from Azerbaijan. I guess, speaking about hope, solidarity, one thing that keeps coming back to me in most of the panels that I've been attending while at the conference is, how do we stay within this, resilience and in the world of solidarity, while we also have to navigate through a bigger crisis of populist regimes, of finding new alternative ways to continue funding our newsrooms and journalists, and how do, in your respective countries or in your respective contexts, how do we continue convincing the few remaining allies that are out there who haven't really turned the tide that this work is important? Because in the conversations that I've had so far here, I feel a lot of frustration among the journalists and the newsrooms who are sort of in this, I don't know what's to call it, difficult situation. So yeah, we'd be curious to hear if you have any more positive and inspirational answers to that.
I fear we have just about 2 minutes left, so I don't know if anyone would like to take a brief crack. Lydia.
I could say something. I think is in Mexico we say persist and resist, always. And while you're in a crisis, like everywhere in Central Asia or Latin America, everywhere around the world, mostly, what Maria Reza and the previous panel said, it's so important, because it's like the new reality is this: the new owners of narrative are these big tech companies, right? So we have to resist and persist and stay there. And some people will go and do something else, work in a restaurant, and that's okay. But some of us won't, And I think that's, again, a resilience. That's what it means. It's sometimes you go through, you don't earn enough money and all this, and it's very complicated, but you keep going because it's important to you. I don't know, it's just very simple. It's a crisis, and you go through it. You navigate the crisis with reality, and you accept it, and it's one day at a time. For me, that's it. And for Mexican journalists, it's like that. I talk to my friends all the time, and they are going through hell with many, many things around them, with very similar to what you're going through, with a political and democratic crisis. But we say one day at a time, and we will persist until things change, and then we will readapt, thanks to younger people that know a lot about tech. And I am willing at 62 to just sit down with the younger people to learn from them how to navigate this new world. And I will until I die, I guess.
I wanted to add something. You asked how we can persuade allies to keep supporting journalism, essentially to prove it's important. I think there is one argument that is not very optimistic, but it's very powerful. It's point to them who is trying to kill journalists, or who is killing journalists. Because right before this, there was a panel about Ukrainian journalist named Victoria Roshina, who was killed by Russia in prison, taken captive while reporting in the occupied territories, tortured and killed in prison. At the end, she weighed 30 kilos. If Russia, a huge authoritarian country, was afraid of this small woman, 27 years old, so much that they killed her in prison just because she was a journalist, then journalists must be doing something very important, something that the worst people that there are in the world are very afraid of. And I'm sorry it's not an optimistic argument, but I think it's a very powerful one.
Kadri, last word.
One point was lacking in my introduction, because I dwelled on the internal factors of resilience. There are external factors too, which are solidarity and acknowledgement of the readership. Solidarity has two legs. One is professional solidarity. The second is readership or viewer solidarity. To increase viewers and readership solidarity, we need to engage them. And we need to teach them that free media is cannot be taken for granted. And we need, because with acknowledgement and with appreciation of the readership and the viewers, our resilience gets stronger and stronger, because it makes us happy. That's why.
Thank you very much, Kadri. Thank you all for these last words. And I'll just say one last thing, which is that, Olga, you mentioned what we can learn from history, and that's also one of the reasons why we're on our 75th anniversary thinking about what we can see from the past of fighting for press freedom, fighting for the survival of journalism, and trying to draw some inspiration without downplaying how serious the crisis is that we face today. So I want to thank you all for sharing your insights, and thanks to the audience for listening and for being here. And I wish you a good end to the festival. Thank you.